Today's video is sponsored by R6 Tracker, and they added a huge update. You're going to want to go down in the link in the description or pinned comment and download for free now. Now, R6 Tracker 3.0 is now available. They added so much stuff. Basically, you can now have operator stats, tracking stats for weapon stats, map stats, and much more. You can compare your stats on every single map per game mode. Check your win rate on attack and defense for each map. You can also filter by match win percentage, KD rating, opening KD, average time alive, and headshot percentage. This is a really good way to just track stats overall and just see how you're performing. And this could actually determine what maps you should ban and what maps you should probably avoid. I also really like this MMR graph that shows your MMR history throughout the months. As you can see, I was 5k elo, and you can see when the new season restarts and so on. So what you guys should do is you guys should go check this out if you are interested and download now. You will not regret it. Link is down in the description, guys. Thank you so much, R6 Tracker, for the sponsor. Rainbow Six Siege is probably one of the most complicated FPS games on the market. Not only because of operators, maps, but especially guns and recoil, because these things constantly change. So in today's video, what I'll be doing is I'll be ranking every single gun in Rainbow Six Siege from worst to best. Now, keep in mind, I'm going to go off the function and the quality and value that you get out of a weapon. So if you guys disagree, that's totally okay, but you have to realize you can make any gun in this game work, but I'm just saying from a value standpoint. Okay, so dead last, I'm gonna say the Boss G. And don't get me wrong, you can make this gun work, but once again, from a value standpoint, in a primary weapon, it's just not very viable in my personal opinion. There's gonna be a lot of scenarios where you're gonna have to take multiple gunfights, and only having 2 bullets, which one, you can't make rotates with this shotgun, and 2, you have 2 bullets and it's a pump shotgun. Most of these operators that have the Boss G are just 2, which is Dokkaebi and Vigil. And for secondaries, they have the SMG-12 and the C7, which could be reliable secondaries, but there's just no point in bringing this primary weapon. Don't get me wrong, there are quite a bit of demons that use this gun, but I just think it's dead last in terms of value in this game. Next is the 44 mag semi-automatic, which is a secondary for Cade and Nomad. Now, back in the day when Cade and Nomad were released, you would know this thing used to be an actual sniper. It was a literal primary. It was Han Solo's blaster. I miss those days, I'm not gonna lie. That was prime Siege when this gun first came out. But as you know, it's been nerfed out of the ass. The recoil on it's pretty annoying when if you try to spam the gun, and there's just not much value besides it just being a secondary gun. A lot of times when you're pulling out your secondary, it's either one, because your primary ran out of ammo and you kind of have to take a gunfight, and especially at close range where you can't reload, your secondary is going to be the best thing possible. But with this fat ass scope on it, you're just not going to be pretty successful with it. You can make the argument for an operator like Cade, who doesn't have, you know, a nice scope. You can pull it out for long range gunfights. This thing just isn't consistent enough, and it doesn't make holes like other secondaries. For example, like the Magnum, which is the secondary for Cade, which can make pretty big holes if needed in terms of lines of sight. So that's why this pistol is so low on the list. Next is the P229, which is Echo's secondary pistol. It's so low just because, you know, these operators have the bearing 9, so it just doesn't make sense to grab the pistol instead of the bearing 9. Next is the PRB92. This is Capitel's pistol, and to be honest, I'm having a hard time placing these pistols, and I hate that I have to put so many of these low, but I only have the secondaries to really compare to. It's not a bad gun, but it's just... It's hard to really pick this secondary pistol over, say, if you go like Fuse with a PMM, or say, I was gonna say Sledge with a SMG-11, but you know, there's that. But there's just many other better secondary guns, and I guess you wouldn't really be picking Capital for the gun, you'd be picking him for the utility. Next is the M45 Miyuok. I don't know how to say it. I'm not even going to re-record that. I'm not going to make an attempt. You can laugh. You can make fun of me in the comments because I can't enunciate it. Because I just can't read. I'm stupid, I guess. This is Ash's secondary pistol. And to be honest, I just prefer her other pistol, which is the M7. I just feel like this one can be very inconsistent, especially with the low ammo count. So for maybe it's just I suck and sometimes I potato with pistols, I much rather use the M7. And I just like the noise of it. It's just a cool looking gun. Next is Alibi and Maestro's 357, which is their secondary pistol beside the Bailiff. I just, for the sole reason of just having the Bailiff, I don't understand why you would even use this thing. I guess unless you have Alibi and Maestro, but at the same time, it makes sight setup easier and lines of sight 10 times easier. Next is the MK1 9mm. It's Frost and Buck's secondary pistol. For me, it just doesn't make sense to use this pistol over Frost shotgun. So just for that, I'm going to put this low on the list. Because a lot of times, even with Buck, you have the skeleton key to use. So, you know, it's faster to pull out the skeleton key than it is a pistol. Next is Legion's Q929. It's just a secondary pistol. It's a decent pistol, but once again, I can't really compare and put this higher up on the list comparing to guns like the AK-12 or the G8, for example. Next is the 1911 TAC, which is Maverick's secondary pistol. For me, I can't really say much about secondary pistols, especially for attackers, because you know, a lot of times you're not using that gun. But for me, out of all the pistols I'm looking at with the mag size and overall stats, it's just not my favorite pistol to use. So that's why it's this low on the list. Next is the SDP 9mm. It's Mozzie's secondary pistol. It's not a bad pistol, but there are better pistols just in the game. Next gun is the gun N12. It's Cavier's primary SMG, and out of all SMGs that's in the game, this is probably one of the worst SMGs in my personal opinion, especially when it comes to Cav. I think her loadout, you kind of have to get more up close and personal, and your job as Cav is to really waste time and be able to take closer range gunfights. That's why one, Cav's just not in the meta, and two, it's very hard to make her work. So if I was to run Cav, I would rather use her shotgun, which is way more effective and, to be honest, a lot better. Next gun is the ITA-12L, which is Mirror and Jackal's primary shotgun. The value of you bringing this shotgun will hurt your team more than it helps, because why do you need that type of shotgun when you have a primary shotgun that's literally the same shotgun without a barrel? Doesn't make sense. I don't need to explain it furthermore. And of course, on the flip side, we have the USP-40, which is Mira and Jackal's secondary. In my opinion, they just make more sense to have a secondary shotgun. Overall, like, Mira can make rotates. Jackal can just make random holes in floors. I don't believe he's able to scan through the floor anymore like he used to be able to, but it's just creating random lines of sight can be helpful, especially when it comes to playing vertical, and maybe, you know, Sledge or Buck or whoever has breaching charges dies. You know, having a secondary shotgun can be a lot better. I just find it very weird when I see people use this pistol when you have a secondary shotgun. And Jackal has a PDW, by the way. Like, why? Next is the Supernova, which in my opinion doesn't have a lot of value for the two operators in which are equipped to, which is Habana and Echo. Don't get me wrong, you can make this gun work okay, especially because you do have a bearing 9 for your secondary, but for a lot of the time you're really just going to be hurting yourself more than helping with this kind of shotgun, especially because it's one of those shotguns where you have to shoot, cock, and it's not like the FO12, which is Ella's shotgun, or even the Super 90, and there's just better guns that you should be using on those operators. Next is the ACS-12 shotgun, which is equipped for Alibi and Maestro. Let's talk about these two operators that have this gun. First of all, why would you bring this gun when you have a pocket shotgun for your secondary that can make rotates in any lines of sight that need it? Maestro has an LMG, the only LMG I believe that's on defense, and it just works a lot better than this shotgun, because like the rate of fire is so slow, and sure, you might be able to get some shots off and whatnot, but it just doesn't do a lot of damage. I believe it only does like 27 damage per shot, which I guess can add up, but it just shoots so slow. And on the flip side, when you have Alibi, you have her SMG, which is probably one of the most high rate of fire guns on a 3-speed defender. It just doesn't make any sense to use the shotgun on either one of those ops. So just for the value, and especially for the operators that you have, this is probably one of the worst guns in the game. Next is the GSH-18, which is Fuse's pistol. In my opinion, I just think the PMM, it just is way better. The damage is better. Sure, it has a less mag count, but overall, it's just a better pistol. This is Spaz 12 on Valkyrie. To me, I'm not a big fan of this shotgun. I'd much rather use Cav's Spaz 15, but I understand you would much rather use an operator like Valkyrie, which has more intel. And a lot of people aren't a big fan of her MPX, which I actually like the MPX, even though it can be a pea shooter. Next is Nox 612 SD. It's basically the same gun as the 612 on Legion, but it does have a suppressor, which is really cool, and I feel like it does benefit Nox pretty well, and just overall her loadout. But it's very situational in my personal opinion. You have to be a rat to use it. Next is the CS-RX 300, which is Cali's primary sniper rifle. To me, sniper rifles in Rainbow Six Siege really don't make sense. Don't get me wrong, when you have someone like Glaz, his fire rate is multiple, so it's having a bolt action sniper rifle, to me, is just putting your team at a disadvantage. There are scenarios where it can definitely work out, and you can make it work, but for the value of the operator itself, I just don't think she's in the meta very much, and especially her having that primary kind of limits her ability to really get around the map and help out with refrags and gunfights, because a lot of times when it comes to refrags and proper gunfights, you're going to be shooting at multiple people, so it's going to be really hard, especially with the slow ADS that is on that sniper rifle. So that's why I put this gun so low on the list. Next is the MK17 CQB, which is Blackbeard's primary AR. Now, I don't know what they really did to this MK17, but it is one of the most disgusting assault rifles I've ever seen in any video game which had an MK weapon. I understand that it's its own variance in this game, but for me, I find it's literally the worst gun I've ever used in terms of assault rifle in a video game. It is so slow, it does not hit that hard, and especially with Blackbeard's shield being basically, it is a one-shot, it is so hard to properly use this gun, and it doesn't have a high mag count, so you can't compensate for that. So you really have to be able to hit your shots and hope that you don't get perspective while using Blackbeard. I just don't think you should be using Blackbeard. I'm gonna be honest, like, he's dog shit. Next is going to be the Super 90. In my personal opinion, when it comes to operators like Malusi and Frost that have this primary, it just doesn't make sense to use this gun over what they have. Let's start with Frost. Frost has the rotate capability as her secondary shotgun. She has a shield, so it just makes more sense to use her SMG, which has a 1.5 times scope, especially with the extended barrel buff that's coming out. Why would you use the Super 90? Unless you're memeing. If you're memeing, that makes sense. But we're talking about overall value. Now, on the flip side, let's talk about Malusi. Malusi is a 3 armor. She could not get around the map quick enough to utilize this gun anymore. Maybe when she was a 3 speed, it would be a lot better because you can rat out and rotate as quick as possible. But no. And especially not now. You can make the argument that she can make rotates. Well, she can already make rotates with impacts. So there you go. Next is the 612, which is Legion and Ying's primary shotgun. Besides just them two operators, if this gun was on any other operator, it would still feel underwhelming, especially when you go head to head against any other shotgun, like for example Smoke's primary shotgun, or even Doc's primary shotgun, or Jaeger's primary shotgun. This is definitely a low end shotgun in my personal opinion, and then you put it with each operator that has it, which is Ying and Legion, and it's very underwhelming. By the way, I'm not talking also about Nox shotgun. That's another part of this list because they're two different guns. Basically, they're considered two different guns just because one has a suppressor, but we'll talk about that after. Next is the AR-1550, which is Maverick's DMR. For me, out of all the DMRs in the game, this is my least favorite just because of the low ammo count. And comparing to all the other DMRs in the game that have higher clip and mag size, it just feels so underwhelming, especially when you have the M4. Why would you pick this gun over the M4? It just seems so silly, especially if you're on controller. I was streaming console literally yesterday, and I had to use, I think the Rooney's DMR, and I suck very bad. So if you can use a DMR on controller, respect to you, but it is hard having a fast trigger finger on a trigger instead of a mouse. Next is the OTS-03, which is Glaz's primary sniper rifle. For me, I feel like Glaz is okay. Like, he's just not really in the meta. Of course, he's one of those operators which you can make work just like any other, you know, operator. But to me, I'm not a big fan of just sniper rifles in Siege, like I said. So for me, I'm putting this lower on the list. I know a lot of Glaz mains are going to be punching the air. Of course, you could be amazing with it, but for me, I just rather somebody with, let's say, like an AK or any automatic weapon, to be honest. Next is the SPSMG9, which is Clash's secondary SMG. For me, I'm not a huge fan of using Clash, and a lot of times when you're using that secondary, you have to be a good shot to kill multiple people. And out of all the secondary SMGs, this is my least favorite one. Next is the C75 Auto, which is Vigil's secondary automatic SMG. For me, I'm just not a big fan of the mag size and the fat ass iron sight, and I much rather use the SMG-12. Next is the P9, and in my opinion, the P9 is a very solid secondary weapon. For me, a lot of times I'm not going to really pick the P9 over the LFP, which is the other secondary that Twitch and Doc and Rook have. But the revolver, for me, I like to use the revolver on defense and then use the P9 on attack, just because it just feels like a lot of the times if I'm having to use my secondary with Twitch, it's probably because I'm getting swung by multiple people. So the P9 is more reliable since it has more ammo count. Next is Buck's DMR. I just find this is one of the most underwhelming DMRs next to Mavericks. It just doesn't feel fun to use, and it's just not very consistent. Next is Cav's secondary, which is the suppressed PRB92. To me, like, it's a cool pistol and whatnot, and it does what it does, but a lot of times the value of using Cav in general just isn't very good. But I gotta say, when you do use Cav and you do use the secondary pistol, it can feel really great for the ability and being able to interrogate. Next is the PMM. To me, this is my favorite pistol in the entire game, but I know a lot of people would much rather use the GSH because of the ammo count, but something about it, just the PMM, back in the days, I used to run some Fuse Shield, and it would shred. Next is Twitch's revolver, which is LFP. It's a great secondary, but once again, sometimes on defense, I would only use this on Doc and Rook, but on attack, I would use the P9. It's really personal preference, but it is a solid secondary. Next is Warden's P10. It does have a little scope, which is a huge advantage compared to a lot of the secondaries in the game. But I'd much rather Ella's RG15 because, you know, it just feels better, to be honest, as a secondary. And I don't really use Warden that much, so... Next is Rg15, which is Ella's pistol, like I was just saying. It's a very solid pistol, and it's a good secondary, especially if you run Ella's primary shotgun. On Zofia, it's cool. Like, there's nothing really much to say. It's a pistol, so... Next is SMG-12, which is Vigil's secondary. It's a solid secondary, especially just because it's an SMG. Most SMGs in Siege can be very effective at short range, and could be very helpful because of the high fire rate on most of these weapons. Next is SGCQB, which is Doc's primary shotgun. For me, I find that it's just not really a good mixture on an operator like Doc, and even like operator like Twitch. Why would you ever want to use this when you have such good primary weapons? You could say rotate capability, but now Doc being able to make rotates, that's just a game changer. And Rook has impact, so why would you use this? Next is Blackbeard's SR25. Blackbeard has a very bad kit overall, in my personal opinion. Like, his primary guns suck. Of course you can make them work, but his primary AR itself sucks. The rate of fire sucks. Blackbeard sucks. If you use Blackbeard, you probably suck. And his DMR sucks. The only thing good that he has going for him is he has stuns, I guess, and he has a deagle. Next is the 417. Now, this would be probably higher up on the list if, you know, Twitch and Lion didn't have this, because, like, they just have better primary weapons overall. The F2 is just way better, and Lion's assault rifle is also way better, so it just doesn't make sense to bring this DMR, like, ever. Next is the M1014, which is Pulse and Castle's primary shotgun. For me, I just don't like the shotgun. It's cool sometimes if you're memeing, or sometimes you might be using Pulse and like you have a specific strat for it. But Castle has a secondary shotgun, and for Pulse, you're not really picking Pulse for the rotate capability, more or less getting intel and just using your C4. So there, once again, there could be times where you can definitely utilize the M10, but I just feel like the ump would be 10 times better. Sense's POF9, this gun is not good. Like, even when they buffed it, time of the release, that for some reason they decided to just make it have the worst recoil ever. And it's just not worth crutching, if that makes sense. You know how there's some operators that might not have the best utility or best gadget, but they make up for by, you know, just crutching their gun? Well, Sense is just not one of them. Next is the Sausage. It's a cool shotgun, but for me, when I'm using operators that have this gun, I just much rather use their other primaries. And honestly, like, sometimes it can feel very inconsistent compared to other guns maybe that can do it a lot better, like the FO12. I understand if you're running Capcan, you might want to get a little cheeky and use, you know, the shotgun, but I feel like Ella would be a lot better if you're playing close ranges like that, where you have to use, you know, like a shotgun and you want to be like a little bit of a rat. Next is the T95, which is Ying's LMG. I feel like this is one of the weaker LMGs in the game. It just feels like the bullets are shooting like peas, if that makes sense. Like, if a pea had a baby, it's like you're shooting those. That's how peas it is. It's like pea, just peed, you know? Next is Capital's M249. This is his LMG. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this over the AR, so just for that, I'm putting this right here on the list. Overall, like I said, the LMG meta is gone, so there's just really no point in trying to crutch that, especially with the LMG nerfs. Next is the LMGE, which is Zophia's LMG. I'm just not a big fan of LMGs altogether. It's just annoying as hell to use and play against, and especially with the recoil nerf to LMGs, which was needed. I'm glad to say that the LMG meta is definitely out at the moment, so that's why this LMG is so low on the list. It does have like 400 rounds, 200 apiece until you have to reload, so that's cool, but it's just, I rather use Zophia's other primary. Next is the M870, which is Jaeger and Bandit's primary shotgun. Now, they're a really good shotgun, I'm gonna be honest. I love using this shotgun. Back in the day, if you used to go up 3-0, you would 5-man rush with Recruit, and Recruit would have this, and you would be a 3-speed, and you would just literally run into sight 5-man with M870s, and people would get slammed. A lot of the times, though, there's not a lot of scenarios where I would really want to have to use this M870 over Jaeger's primary or Bandit MP7, but to be honest, that's just me. It's a cool shotgun, but it cannot be higher than a lot of these guns. Next is a Scorpion. I know what you're gonna say. You're probably sitting there like judging me, but I just find this gun to be one of the most inconsistent guns in the game, and especially how it's been nerfed over the years. It's just not what it used to be. It is a fun gun to use, I do gotta say, but it just can't be high on the list. Next is the P90. A lot of people don't like this weapon because it is a pea shooter, don't get me wrong, but it's a very fun pea shooter, especially if you get an ace or you start slamming kids with it. It just feels like an extra backhand. But for me, when it comes to this gun, I much rather use the other primary that the operator has. For example, Doc, he has an MP5 and it has a 1.5 times scope, so it's just more valuable in my personal opinion. Next is the TCS-G12, which is Cade's shotgun. For me, I find this shotgun can be either hit or miss. A lot of the times when I use it, it feels amazing, especially if your aim is on. But for a lot of the times, I find it very hard to kill multiple people in a round if there are multiple people looking at me, if that makes sense. So just for that reason, I much rather use an AUG that's way more consistent. I can pre-fire a lot easier using a, like an AUG over this shotgun. So yeah, that's why this is lower on the list. Next is MP5K, and I don't know if you're going to be surprised that this MP5K is placed right here on this list. I don't know if you expect it to be higher or lower, but it's kind of like a mid gun in my personal opinion. It's not bad, but it's not great. When you had the 1.5 times scope on Wamai with this gun, it felt amazing, but now it just feels meh. Why am I going to pick this gun over the AUG, if that makes sense? Next is the FO12, which is Ella's primary shotgun. Now, this primary shotgun can be very effective, but I feel like once the extended barrel buff comes out, this is going to be a very amazing gun, and you're going to see a lot more Ella players just running around piecing you up with this shotgun. Next is the UMP 45. A lot of people say that this is the worst gun in the game, but I don't think it is. Like, it can feel like the worst gun in the game in certain scenarios, but to be honest, it's an okay weapon, especially if it has a 1.5 times scope. It can definitely suit some of these operators very well. Now, if this gun was on attack, it would probably be literally the worst gun in the game. It would feel disgusting to use, but since it is a defensive weapon, it's all right. Next is the FMG9. Overall, this gun is solid, but for the operators that the gun has, for example, like smoke, I'm not bringing the FMG9 when I have the SMG11. Knock, it can be very, very solid on knock, but overall, like, it just feels like a mid-range like SMG. Like, it's all right. It's not the best, but it is solid. Next is the MPX. Once again, it's one of those guns that a lot of people find is a pea shooter, but for me, I feel like it is a solid SMG. And especially as the season's gotten a lot slower in terms of the meta, it feels a lot easier to use, and it feels just solid. Most of these guns are just in the solid area. Not the best, but solid. You know, just solid. Next is the AUG A2. Now, Wamai has this AUG, and so does IQ. This AUG is okay. It is, once again, solid. It's not the best, but not the worst. On defense, it can be very hard hitting, but you will lose a lot of gunfights just because how slow the gun shoots. So you have to have really proper crosshair placement. But on IQ, I would not be using this gun. Like, I feel like people are wild for using IQ and not using the Commando or G8. Next is the AUG A3, which is Cade's AUG. This AUG is really good, especially just for Cade itself. It does shoot a little bit slow, and it would be higher up on the list if it had the 1.5 times scope still. But overall, even with a 1.0 scope, it's all right. It's not bad. Next is the MK14 EBR, which is Aruni's DMR, and it's also Dokubi's DMR. This DMR is solid all around. It's my favorite DMR in the game, but there are a lot of times where you're gonna lose gunfights just because you have a DMR. That's the sad thing about DMRs in Siege, is rate of fire usually wins you more gunfights than, you know, damage. It sucks, but, you know, it is what it is. Next is the K1A. This is Vigil's primary. This is a good weapon overall, especially for an operator like Vigil. It has a decent rate of fire and decent damage, especially just with Vigil's kit. This gun just works very well. Next is the Spear 308. This is a good weapon, but I feel like it shoots a little bit slower. On Thunderbird, it is a good weapon, but I would not be using this on Finka. I always found, even with the LMG nerf, the LMG still is better on Finka, but that is my personal preference. Next is the 9x19, which is Capcan's SMG. This is one of my favorite guns to use on defense, especially with the 1.5 times scope. I feel like it's just one of the better defensive weapons. It overall feels solid, and I don't see enough people talking about this gun. Next is 6P41, which is Finka and Fuse's LMG. This LMG is probably still very solid in my personal opinion. Don't get me wrong, I don't really want to use this, but say if I were to go Finka, I would use this. If I was Fuse, I'd be running the AK. Gridlock's LMG. Now, this has always been a very underrated pick. It just has such a quick reload time for an LMG that it's great, to be honest. It honestly doesn't even feel like an LMG most times, just because of the quick reload time and the lack of recoil it used to have. It is a solid pick, but I much rather use her other primary. Next is the Para 308, which is Capital's primary AR. This AR is solid, but overall, I feel like there's other assault rifles that are way better than this gun. This gun isn't bad, but once again, there just are better assault rifles. Next up is MP5 SD, which is Echo's MP5 with a suppressor. This has always been a cool gun, and I always enjoyed using it. I've never once thought that it needs to be buffed or nerfed. It's a very balanced gun in my personal opinion, and yeah, that's why it's right here on the list. Next is Gridlock's F90. This is one of the most underrated guns in the game. Nobody talks about this enough. If this gun was on any other attacker or even defender, people would be using this gun 10 times more. This gun is solid as hell. Next is Zophia's M762. Now, if this was maybe, I don't know, like 2 years ago, this gun would be probably top 5, but it's sad to say that it's been nerfed out of the ass. I'm not too sure about console, but on PC, it has such a peculiar, has such a random recoil pattern, and it is very annoying to use in some notes compared to like back in the day when Bolo used to main Zofia, and he would make her look so amazing. Now she's all right, and the gun is all right. It's still decent, but it's nothing what it once used to be. Next is the SC 3000K, which is Zero's primary. I feel like this is one of those guns, once again, if it was on a different operator that's a little bit more meta or quote unquote fun, people would be using the hell out of it because it is a very enjoyable weapon. For me, I love Zero, so I love using this gun and just using Zero in general. So that's why this gun is so high up on the list. It's just overall solid when it comes to rate of fire, damage, everything. Next is Thorn's UZK50GI, which is one of the newer SMGs that we've received in Rainbow Six Siege. I like this gun. I feel like it's very solid and it's fun to use. It looks very cool, but comparing to some of the other SMGs in the game, I feel like it's just not better than them, but it is still overall a solid gun, and it has high damage with decent rate of fire. The only downside I would say about this gun is the capacity of the mag is only around like 20 to 22, I believe. Next is the Commando 9, which is Mozzie's primary. Besides it having one of the coolest reload animations in the game, I just feel like there's better primaries out there, and most of the time when I'm using Mozzie, I much rather have the advantage of having a 1.5 times scope on the P10 Ronnie than using the Commando 9. Next is the AR-33, which is Flores' primary, Thatcher's secondary primary, and yeah, it's a solid gun, but if I'm using someone like Thatcher, I'd much rather use the L8. The L8 is my personal favorite gun in the game. Do I think it's the best gun in the game? Well, no, but it's my favorite. Overall, the AR-33 complements Flores pretty well, so that's why it's so high up on the list. But please, when you're using Thatcher, don't use this gun. Like, the L8 is just way better in my personal opinion. Next is P10 Ronnie. Is it Ronnie or Ronnie? Because I know I said Ronnie earlier on in the video, but I don't know. That's why, whatever. Anyways, the P10, very solid gun because of the 1.5 times scope. I think this gun definitely would be lower on the list if it didn't have this specific scope, because on defense, there's a lot of guns that don't have this scope. So, for example, the MP5K, if it had the 1.5 times scope again on Wamai, it would definitely be higher on the list, but it complements well with the 1.5 because the rate of fire, and because Mozzie, you're able to roam, lock down certain parts of the map, and it just has a fast fire rate, so it's good. This is the Bearing 9, which is Echo and Habana's secondary. This gun is very solid. You can basically use this as a primary most of the time. It's basically like the SMG 11, just like its little brother. Overall, very good secondary. Next is the AK-74M, which is Nomad's primary. Now, for me, I'm not the biggest fan of this gun. Like, I have days where I'm hitting all my shots with the gun, and there's just other days where it just feels like a pea shooter. I don't know what it is about this AK. It might be the slow fire rate compared to other assault rifles, but yeah, for me, it is a good weapon, but sometimes it's just hit or miss. Next gun is 9mm C1, which is Frost's primary. The reason why this is so far up on the list is because of the scope and because of the extended barrel buff, which is just going to be so insane on this weapon. Next is the Vector 4.5. This has been one of the most effective guns on defense, especially with Goyo now receiving it with a 1.5 times scope, which I don't know what Ubisoft was thinking, but it just complements mirrors so well just because the mirrors, you can basically pre-fire just off of the angle that you have with the mirror. It's been a amazing, groundbreaking weapon. Next is the Type 89, which is Habana's primary. This gun is just one of those guns also that I find very hit or miss. It does suck that it has such a low mag count. That's why this is a little bit lower on the high end. But overall, it is a good weapon, but it's just not my preferred. If I do have to go hard breach and I have more choices, I'm definitely thinking in account of weapon choice. I much rather go, like, for example, Thermites, because he has the 5.56. The 5.56 is probably the most consistent gun out of all the hard breaches. Might not be the flashiest, might not be the best, but probably the most consistent. Next is the V308, which is Lion's primary. This gun, ever since its release, has been so cool, just because it's basically, it is a Vector, except modified to be basically assault rifle because it has a drum mag. So yeah, it's a really cool weapon, and it's been one of my low-key favorites on the attacker side. It's really great, but I just can't rank it over the S tier type weapons that we're gonna see going forward. Next is 552 Commando, which IQ and B-Man has this gun. Sucks to say that this gun is on such underwhelming operators, but it is what it is. When you do get to use the gun, it is very solid, especially on IQ, where you can use an angle grip and a 1.5 times scope. Next is the ARX 200, which Yana and Nomad have this gun. This gun is solid as hell. Probably one of the most consistent guns in my personal opinion. The only downside to this gun is the low ammo count, which is the reason why a lot of people will use the AK-7 for M, but it is a great gun. Next gun is the DP27, which is Shashanka's LMG. This gun is just solid. A lot of people shit on it, but it's great for making rotates and lines of sight, and you can just pre-fire out of your ass with it. Especially with his gadget, it works well with the gun. Next gun is the G36C. A lot of PC players right now are saying this is one of the most consistent guns, which can be true, and I always thought about that, but I find it quite weird that everybody's hyping this gun up when there are just better guns, in my opinion. But it's here this high up on the list for a reason. So this gun is the MX4 Storm, which is Alibi's primary. Now, if this gun still had the 1.5 times scope, I would still have it in the higher top 3, but since it lost, it's a little bit lower than expected, because I just think there are better guns overall. Next is the C7E, which is Jackal's primary. I've always found this gun to be very solid, and it just feels really good to use. Next gun is Maverick's M4. This has always been probably my top 5 favorite guns in Rainbow Six Siege. It just sucks that Maverick lost his 1.5 times scope, which I do understand why he did. It just, a lot of guns feel completely different when you lose their magnifying scopes. So like this is why it's a little bit lower than where I want it to be. But yeah, M4. Next is the L8-5, which is Sledge's primary. This is my favorite gun in the entire game, especially because Sledge is my favorite operator in the game. In my personal opinion, I think it is one of the most consistent guns overall, next to the 5.56. So yeah, this is why it's so high up. Next gun is the G8. Now, this is the best LMG in the game, in my personal opinion. On IQ, it feels great, especially because IQ is a 3-speed. But even when you use a Maru and you have like a 1.5 times scope or above, it's just a great gun. Like, it has like barely any recoil. It shoots super fast. It hits hard. Like, it's a great gun. Next gun is the PDW. Overall, it's a very good, consistent gun, especially matched up with an OSA shield. Next gun is the M590A1, which is smoke and mute shotgun. I personally think that this shotgun is the best shotgun in the game, even though sometimes it can really make me want to punch my wall, because it seems like I hit somebody and it's like all the pellets went around them. But that's just shotguns in general in Siege, so I can't really complain. But this gun has just always been consistent when making rotates, and even on the lethal side, so I really can't complain about the gun. Next gun is the C8 for Buck. This gun has always just been great and consistent. Once again, it sucks that Buck doesn't have an ACOG, but this gun is just still amazing no matter what, especially because it does have a skeleton key on top of it, so you have so much usage and value just for running this operator. Next is the R4C. This gun is amazing. I gotta give it to you. No matter how much they nerf the gun, take the ACOG from Ash, whatever, this gun is just solid as hell, especially on Ash, because your main objective with Ash is just to create so much space and be aggressive. And with the fire rate and damage, this really does its job, especially with this gun now having angle grip. It's just perfect to use in that type of role. Next is a 5.56 XI, which is Thermite's primary, and OSA has this weapon as well. This has just been the most consistent gun for the last 7 years, in my personal humble opinion. If you disagree, that's totally okay. You're probably like, damn bro, how is this gun better than the guns previously? It's because, once again, I think it's the most consistent gun overall. Next is the Super Shorty, and I'm not picking this gun for the lethal capacity. It's just what it brings to the table. It gives you the rotation capability, lines of sight, and just sight setup, which is one of the most important things in Rainbow Six Siege. Now, if you take this gun and you put it on any defender that doesn't have a rotation capability, they're going to be picked a lot more. That's just the truth. Why do you think Mozzie used to be picked so much? I'm not saying Mozzie definitely is picked less, actually, since, you know, his super shorty was taken away, because he had so much going for him. He still does, but the super shorty just gave people another reason to pick him. Next is the ITA-12S, which is Mira's secondary shotgun. It's the same thing applies. It's just, I feel like it's a better shotgun than the super shorty because of the capacity. So yeah, the same reason applies for the last reason that I've just put for the super shorty. Next is the Bailiff 410. Once again, no lethal reasoning for this, more or less just for sight setup, because sight setup is the most important thing in Siege, and I'm just not going off lethal reasoning. I'm going off overall value of the guns, and just for what I've seen in terms of like when an operator receives a gun like this. Like, for example, I'm seeing Doc play 10 times more, not only because this new buff with his stems, but because he was rewarded with this gun because people picked him way less. So now there's a reasoning to pick Doc over Thunderbird, for example. This is hilarious that this gun is so high up, but the 416, see, I just can't get over how many times this gun has been nerfed, and it's still amazing. Don't get me wrong, like, it was way better back in the day, but it's still like such a solid gun. It's so boring to use, though, in my personal opinion, because I've been playing Jaeger for the last 7 years, and like, you always need a freaking Jaeger, but like, his gun is just so good. I gotta give it to Jaeger. Like, clapping for that man. By the way, that wasn't my hands. Wink wink. Next is the MP7. This gun, once again, just like Jaeger, has always been solid, always been consistent. Fire rate is very high and does decent damage. So gotta give it to the good old MP7. Next is the T5, and this is the best defensive weapon in terms of stats. It would be a little bit higher, but I can't place this gun higher over the next few weapons I'm about to place. Next, and no surprise, is the F2. This is the third best gun in the game, in my personal humble opinion. This gun, if given to like a hard breach roll or something crazy like that, it would be played all the goddamn time, no matter how bad the hard breach roll was. Twitch on its own is a alright operator, but the thing is with Twitch, in my opinion, is people just use Twitch for the gun, and it kind of sucks because Twitch is supposed to be a support role, but it's kind of turned into a fragger role, which is quite silly. But yeah. At number 2 is probably the AK-12. Now, you're probably questioning, what the hell is number 1? Well, we'll get to that. AK-12 has always been amazing. It's just once the AK was put on a hard breach roll like Ace, everybody used it because they're like, okay, I can just frag out after I open the wall, because the hard breach capability is so easy. You just throw it onto a wall, and even if it's mute jammered, you can leave it on there until someone shoots the jammers, and you're solid. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, eh? And at number 1 is the SMG-11. Now, you're probably angry that I didn't put the F2 or AK at number 1, but I just think that this is the most solid gun in the game. This, like, I can't get over how solid this gun is. Like, this is my favorite gun, hands down, and that's why this list has been personal preference. So you're definitely going to agree. My number 1 is going to be different to your number 1, but if you think about it, think about what has been the best gun almost forever. Like, look how good Smoke and Mute are, and don't get me wrong, their gadgets are hands down amazing, but just think about how good that SMG-11 is. Now, you specifically need to be a SMG-11 player, but it's amazing, man. Now, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure that you guys like, sub, and comment. I do feel like I missed a few guns. Like, I've been sitting here for a few hours trying to like double take and look, but I just can't. I just don't know. I like, I'm overthinking this so much, so please correct me down in the comments, because I've literally been sitting here for hours. I'm pretty sure I might have missed the Deagle. I don't know. Once again, I'm overthinking. The Deagle, if I did miss it, it would be pretty high up, probably in the top 40 as a secondary. And besides that, I really don't know what else I missed. So I apologize for that, guys. But besides that, let me know your guys' thoughts and opinions on this video. And if since I missed something, yeah, comment down below like what your worst and best gun in the game would be.